Welcome to the Ticktective podcast, a program of the Bay Area Lyme Foundation, where our mission is to make Lyme disease easy to diagnose and simple to cure. I'm your host, Dana Parrish, and I'm the co-author of the book Chronic, and I sit on the advisory board of Bay Area Lyme Foundation. This program offers insightful interviews with scientists, clinicians, patients, and other interesting people. We're a nonprofit based in Silicon Valley, and thanks to a generous grant that covers 100% of our overhead, all of your donations go directly to our research and prevention programs. For more information about Lyme disease, please visit us at bayarealyme.org. Akiko Iwasaki, Ph.D., is a Sterling Professor of Immunobiology at the Yale University School of Medicine. She has received many awards and honors. She was elected to the National Academy of Sciences in 2018, the National Academy of Medicine in 2019, and to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2021. Professor Iwasaki has been a leading scientific voice during the COVID-19 pandemic, and I am so pleased to welcome her today. Welcome, Akiko. I am so excited to meet you in person, finally. So thank you so much for doing this for us today. I want to get started because we have so many questions for you. Really excited about your new center at Yale to study the treatment and all the interesting overlap between chronic Lyme and ME/CFS and long COVID. I wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here too. So this new center, we're very excited to launch this. It's really, there are two big major aims for the center. One is to study these post-acute infection syndromes that have been historically understudied, including ME/CFS and long Lyme and long COVID. We're trying to understand if there are any common disease pathogenesis that we can learn by studying these diseases together. The other aim of the center is to make vaccines that are safe and effective in preventing diseases, including these kinds of chronic illnesses. And there we're really focusing on strategy to block the infection at the site of entry, such as the nasal mucosa, by developing mucosal vaccines.
I had read that you had your own tick-borne disease story, and I wondered if we could talk a little bit about that, because you contracted something called alpha-gal syndrome. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So we live in Connecticut, and there are lots of ticks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even though we are careful, it's difficult to avoid the ticks altogether. So yes, the alpha-gal syndrome is a serious illness. It's an allergic condition that is caused by bites of ticks, and it's not an infectious disease, but it's an allergic disease. Essentially, the alpha-gal syndrome happens in people who get tick bites, and not everyone, but some people who get the tick bites, especially the Lone Star tick in the United States is associated with this disease. And something in the saliva of the tick elicits IgE, which is an allergic form of antibody against the alpha-gal molecule, which is a sugar molecule found on most mammals, but not in humans and primates. So we make these allergic antibody responses. And so for those who develop it, every time you eat mammalian meat, which is red meat, pork, beef, lamb, you get this severe reaction. Some people get skin rash and other people get GI issues. And I had, for a long time, I didn't know why I was getting so sick after eating a meal. And I finally figured this out. And after that, just by avoiding red meat, I'm fine.
I don't know how widespread the knowledge is about it, so I'm glad that we're getting to talk about it today. I think that it's becoming more of a problem, and it doesn't seem to be, there's not a lot of spotlight on this particular aspect of getting a tick bite. So, I mean, you kind of covered what your goals are in terms of finding these commonalities between these three diseases, ME/CFS, chronic Lyme, long COVID. In terms of Lyme. Do you think that it persists?
Yeah, so I think we need to kind of, first of all, you're the expert in this. I'm still learning about it. But in terms of calling something chronic, you can either be referring to chronicity of the disease or chronicity of the pathogen, or both.
Yeah.
And there may be chronic pathogen. This is sort of parallel to what long COVID is, right?
Yes.
There may be chronic pathogen that is causing, long Lyme, or it could be that autoantibodies or autoimmunity that's triggered by the infection, or initial infection, that's triggering the long-term chronic disease elements. It could be, other sort of tissue damage issues. I mean, these are all parallel sort of hypotheses that we have for long COVID, but this is something that we've got to really understand better. Is it the chronicity of the pathogen, or is it the, something that's triggered chronically after the infection is over? And we don't really quite understand the answer for this for long Lyme or for long COVID yet.
Could it be different things in different people?
Yeah, that's what I'm been trying to promote, this idea that, for example, long COVID is not one disease. It's likely multiple different diseases in one umbrella. So this means that, some people may have persistent virus, and others may have autoimmunity. Others may have Epstein-Barr virus reactivation. And there may be 4 or 5 different endotypes within long COVID. So yeah, I suspect that that's the case for long Lyme and ME/CFS and many other post-acute infection syndromes. So, even just to sort of say long COVID is a disease, it's likely more than multiple diseases combined in one sort of term.
I feel like you can sort of bust a lot of myths that go around and that people are very confused about. I get a lot of questions about, what is my risk for long COVID? Also, if I had a mild infection, a mild acute infection, what's the big deal? Why do I have to care about it? What do you say about that?
It's certainly true that if you had severe COVID that required hospitalization or even ICU treatment, that the rate of developing post-acute sequela are high. That's upwards of 80% of the people. So certainly that's one group of people who will suffer from consequences afterwards. But even if you had a milder infection who didn't require hospitalization, there is still a significant risk associated with developing long COVID. And that could be between 5 to 10% of the people who then go on to develop long COVID. And of course, it depends on the number of vaccinations and other health issues that are related to how one deals with that infection. But it definitely carries a significant risk. So I think that, even today, we should really be worried about getting long COVID and trying to avoid it as much as possible.
I really like that you make the distinction between post-viral and post-acute viral, or post-infectious and post-acute infection. So if you don't mind, I know this is minutia maybe to us, but I think it's a really important distinction. And I wanted to see if you could just explain why you call it post-acute infection when referring to these long-term illnesses.
Right. So that is because we're careful about terminology associated with these kind of chronic conditions. Because as I already mentioned, it could be that the pathogen is persisting, which would fit the chronic infectious disease category, or it could be that the initial infection triggers something that's permanent, or at least long lasting in people. And that's sort of post-acute phase of an acute infection that happened, right? So because we don't know what percentage of the people suffer from either of these cases, or maybe it's a combination that's happening without the persistent virus. Yeah.
Right. And I always say, like, semantics inform your care, and they inform treatment ultimately. So these are, to me, really, really important things to be able to explain. And I also, another thing that's constantly being said is that it's a respiratory virus. And I don't really think of it like that. And I wanted to know how you think of COVID.
Yeah, so it is thought to be a acute respiratory viral pathogen.
Right.
Now, it's neither acute nor respiratory because the virus can be found in so many different organs, and it could be chronic in some people. We are still seeing pieces of virus found after years, post-infection. So that would, to me, suggest that it's not so acute in some people.
Is it more of a vascular disease than it is so much respiratory, in your view?
Yeah, certainly it starts off respiratory because that's the entry mechanism for the virus. But if the virus spreads throughout the body and sees different organs, and we know there is plenty of evidence of platelet activation, hypercoagulation, as well as complement activation going on in a large subset of people. Definitely vascular dysfunction may be a relatively common underlying disease pathogenesis in people. Again, it could be a subset of people who are suffering from that.
What are the most prominent symptoms that you're seeing among long COVID patients?
As you know, there are over 200 different symptoms reported.
Yeah.
But the really common ones are, fatigue, severe fatigue, as well as many neurological symptoms, what people call brain fog, as well as memory issues, dizziness, many sort of neurocognitive dysfunction, that trouble finding words, things like that. So that's another quite common symptoms that we're seeing. And of course, there's also pain, as well as sleep issues. There's so many others as well.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of it, honestly, just among friends and family. I'm noticing these things, and it's hard to when you have a very mild acute case, it's hard for people to wrap their head around, like, really, that could cause this problem with my brain, or with shortness of breath, or whatever else 3 months later. And is there a latency period that you see between the acute illness and some of these symptoms?
So again, it's a heterogeneous condition. Some people develop issues during the acute phase that lingers. Other people develop new onset symptoms within the first 3 months after the acute phase. And so it really depends on the person. But yeah, within about the first 3 months, if you start developing these kinds of conditions, it could be long COVID.
In terms of the brain, the impact on the brain, and like neuropsychiatric issues, I mean, I'm also personally observing a lot of new onset anxiety, depression, as you mentioned, insomnia. I even have friends who have kids who have gotten PANS, severe neuroinflammatory symptoms and diseases. At the same time, I'm hearing patients being told, this is in your head. You should be referred to psychiatry, but it seems very much like something biological is going on. And I wanted to ask you about that, about the psychiatric symptoms potentially associated with this.
Yes, obviously, as a result of suffering from long COVID for years now, people, understandably, they are developing anxiety and depression issues. Who wouldn't? It breaks my heart, but so clearly, I mean, these things are bound to happen to people because there's no good treatment and they're suffering. But whether psychiatric diseases are driving the whole gamut of disease associated with long COVID, that I don't agree with, because in a study that Dr. David Petrino and I did together, we reported that a handful of immune features can distinguish people with long COVID with 94% accuracy. So the fact that, we can sort of look at biological factors and use that as a factor that can sort of distinguish people with long COVID, to me, suggests that there is a biological mechanisms that underlie these diseases. And the psychiatric issues may be, a side effect of having had to endure these diseases for a long time.
What about the virus entering the brain, the potential viral reservoirs that we're seeing? Is the virus actually going into the brain, or is it an inflammatory response?
Yeah, so we've looked at this issue carefully. I mean, there are reports, including our own, that show some viral antigens in the brain, but it may not be the most frequent occurrence of viral persistence. Instead, we also have a mouse model in which respiratory only infection in mice can lead to chronic changes in the brain, inflammation, microglial activation and oligodendrocyte loss, and significant changes, damages that occur in the brain without the virus being ever present in the brain. So the virus doesn't have to be inside the brain to cause neurological damages.
And you hear it related also to smell and taste dysfunction, that's a neurological problem.
I think it's an immunological problem too, because people have found activated T cells in the olfactory region of people who are suffering from these kinds of issues. And those T cells, when they're activated chronically, will of course damage the surrounding tissue, and then surrounding neurons around them. So eventually there is a neurological issue, but like what's causing it, it could still be the immune system itself reacting to the virus, or maybe autoantigen, something like that.
Okay. And just for people's, basic understanding, what do T cells do? What's the function and what's the significance of them becoming activated?
Yeah, so T cells are a very important immune cell type that recognize infected cells. And these cells have specific receptors that detect the presence of virus through peptides that are inside of the virus. And
can you say what that means, what a peptide is?
Oh, peptide, sorry. So viruses and many of our cells, we have proteins that are performing different functions.
Yeah.
So these proteins could be cytokine or receptor or signaling molecules. It does so many things. It's a building block for the cell. But the virus also has proteins like SARS spike protein, for example. And T cells can detect pieces of the virus, like the spike protein, and those are called peptides. The proteins, when they're digested into small pieces, are called peptides. And T cells can recognize these peptides, specifically coming from SARS-CoV-2 virus, and kill those cells that are infected. It can also do other things. It can help B cells secrete antibodies. So the T cells are really a central control, command center for the immune system. It tells the other cells what to do, as well as it's a killer cell, right? So it has a lot of different functions, but what happens when the T cells are stimulated chronically is that they can damage the tissues around them. It's like a collateral damage that happen. So that may be what's leading to loss of smell and taste if the T cells are activated chronically in these tissues. And cytotoxic T cells will literally kill the infected cells, and that would also, of course, cause damage.
Are there ways in other diseases where these T cells are activated that we know they can heal, they can go back to their normal state?
There's a lot of talk about immune dysfunction that's happening. And certainly there are alterations in the immune system, as I mentioned, that's happening in people with long COVID. But I think it is possible to restore the baseline level in people if we can target the root cause of disease.
Yeah.
And eliminate that, whether it be viruses that are replicating in deep tissues or autoantibodies or whatever it might be, then the immune system can certainly heal and restore its homeostasis. But the key is to really target the root cause.
Yeah. I'm living proof of of that, of exactly what you're saying, for sure. I'm seeing so much immune dysfunction, what I would consider immune dysfunction, like people that I know that were previously healthy, got a couple of not very overwhelming cases of COVID, and now can't seemingly clear a simple cold, a virus. They have chronic sinusitis. One of my friend's kids was just hospitalized, young, healthy 7-year-old child with double pneumonia. It came after several infections with COVID. Are we seeing, what I've been told by others is like population-wide immune suppression?
Our research, as well as looking at other people's reports, show definitely differences that's happening in people with long COVID. But generally speaking, their immune responses, for example, their immune cells, B cells and T cells, naive cells that can fight new infections are still there.
Yeah.
It's possible that there are other sort of features of their immune system that's not perfect in these people. But for instance, we recently did a study of people with long COVID who got vaccinated and looked at their T cells and B cell responses, and they're at least able to mount immune responses against the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. So I would not think of long COVID as similarly as having immunodeficiency, but there may be subtle changes in their immune responses that make them more susceptible to different kinds of infections. I can't rule that out.
Are you seeing it? I mean, are you noticing it, or is it just me?
Oh, no, I mean, I hear a lot of people talking about that. And obviously this is happening and it's a devastating thing. However, we just don't know what the clear link is between having had multiple COVID infection and being more susceptible to different diseases. That's an area that I think it needs more work.
So in terms of long COVID, what is the general type of person that you're seeing? How old are they? How long have they had long COVID? Did they get it in the first wave? Are you still seeing people that got COVID maybe for the first time, 6 months ago, and now they're the same as the people you were seeing from 2 years ago?
I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't see patients directly, but what I do, I do have the sort of interaction with patients a lot, either online or during we have this Yale Lesson Study where we have town halls and opportunity to interact with patients and learn from them. So from that, what I'm seeing is that people are still developing long COVID today. I mean, it's not that we're done with long COVID. Unfortunately, new cases are happening today. And, maybe the features associated with the original virus in Omicron may be slightly different. The rate of developing long COVID appears to be reduced with Omicron, but it's still worrisome because so many people got infected with Omicron, and they're developing chronic conditions now as a result of it. So, and in terms of the demographics, obviously, female sex is a risk factor for developing long COVID, and age group 30 to 50 years of age. That's sort of again, higher risk for developing long COVID. Yeah. And obviously kids and elderly, they can also get it too. It's just majority of the people that I'm hearing from are women of that age group. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. What about this? Another controversy is hybrid immunity.
Well, if you just compare the immune responses that happen after vaccination or infection and compare that to the hybrid immunity seems to be more robust. So it's likely to prevent more severe diseases than one thing alone. Okay. Whether hybrid immunity and how well the hybrid immunity protects against long COVID, I don't think we know very much how that works, but just sort of based on the immune activation that we see, it's likely to contribute to the reduction in long COVID risks.
I wondered whether, just these constant immune hits I always felt like my Lyme infection was sort of the straw that broke the, I'm sure I had Lyme, like I grew up in New Jersey and similar landscape to where you live in Connecticut, where there's lots of vector-borne diseases, lots of tick-borne diseases. Isn't it more like more infections make you more prone?
Yeah, that's a, big discussion. Work by Dr. Ziad Al-Ali has shown that reinfections still do carry a risk for developing long COVID. Even though the rate of developing long COVID after reinfection may be slightly less, but still, I mean, the fact that you can get it after multiple infections, it's a warning that, people should really take seriously that if we can prevent exposure as much as possible. I know it's not possible to completely prevent it, but any measures one can take to reduce the risk, it is still worth it.
Are you still taking a lot of precautions in your own life?
Yeah, I am. I'm still wearing masks indoors. And of
what
course,
do you wear just specifically? Do you wear N95s? What do you wear?
I wear mostly KN95 because N95 makes me uncomfortable sometimes. Yeah, but mostly KN95.
What about the clotting and the microclots?
Right. So the microclots, so what I can say is that there is definitely now multiple reports showing platelet activation, endothelial dysfunction, complement activation. So all of these combined together paints a picture of chronic engagement of inflammatory responses that is happening inside the blood. And that may be leading to a lot of the issues that we see with long COVID. The other key findings in this area is obviously this sort of muscle dysfunction and inflammation and necrosis that's happening in people with long COVID, and also mitochondrial dysfunction within the muscle cells, right? So that would lead to reduced oxygen uptake and utilization in the muscle cells, which obviously would mean that you have less ATP, less ability to utilize the energy, and it's directly leading to this sort of reduced energy levels in people at the tissue level. So I think all of these combined, we're starting to now see what's happening in various organs and circulating blood, what might be happening. This all could be caused by persistent virus or autoimmune disease or reactivation of herpes viruses. So again, going back to this root causes of what's causing all the downstream elements, that's something we really have to nail down, because targeting the downstream elements is not going to lead to a cure. You have to get to the bottom of what's causing the disease. And if it turns out to be the virus itself, antivirals, monoclonal antibodies, things like that could help get rid of it.
You mentioned reactivated viruses, and I wondered what you thought about other kinds of infections. Again, Lyme. I mean, I hear from a lot of Lyme patients, they get COVID, their Lyme reactivates, their Bartonella reactivates. They retreat because they already have been to this party and they know what it feels like, and their long COVID gets better. Do you think this is a thing? Do you think this is more common than people realize, that there are other pathogens reactivating?
Yeah, it's possible. We haven't obviously exhaustively looked at all the reactivating pathogens. And so it's possible that in addition to herpes viruses, there may be other sort of latent infections that could, become activated again. I think we still need more work to see whether that's actually happening.
I wanted to talk to you about your work in vaccines, because everybody's talking about you developing potentially an inhaled vaccine. And I guess the goal would be to create mucosal immunity. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's one of the two big aims of the center that we're trying to do. Mucosal vaccines, unlike intramuscular vaccines, can establish immune responses at the site of viral entry.
We could possibly stop transmission with a vaccine like that.
Exactly. And maybe even reduce infection so much so that you don't have disease.
Yeah.
So that's really the goal, is to provide, the population-based immunity by preventing transmission, provide personal immunity by preventing disease. If you can attack the virus at its entry site, obviously you prevent a lot of the downstream consequences of vascular damage and so on. So, for all these reasons, I think it makes a lot of sense to go forward with mucosal vaccines.
How likely is it, do you think, to come to fruition?
Yeah, so I think the science is there. There are now multiple studies showing that the inhaled or nasal spray vaccines are incredibly effective in preventing infection and transmission compared to just intramuscular alone. So the science is there. The will hopefully is there too, because vaccine development costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
And manufacturing and distribution and getting approval. This is really not something a lab can do. So this is really the realm of the pharmaceutical companies and vaccine companies. And hopefully they're interested enough to carry some of these forward.
Is it possible that you could create one that could last, that could be variant proof, or at least last a couple of years, as opposed to what we're seeing now, which is very, very little to no lasting immunity at all?
Yeah, that's the other goal of this vaccine strategy, is to first provide the breadth. So one kind of vaccine can protect against different variants. And so some of the members in the center, David Martinez, for example, he's trying to develop a universal vaccine against SARS coronaviruses. And the other thing is longevity, as you say. I mean, we don't want to be boosted every 2 months. So how do we establish long-lived immunity in these mucosal sites? And that's another area of investigation. But just to sort of throw out this idea that let's say we develop a safe, effective nasal spray vaccine. And if you have to get it from the pharmacy every 3 months and spray your nose, would you do it?
So if it stopped transmission and it stopped acquisition of infection, I would.
Okay.
But I would not continue. I would not do what's being done now. I would not take these intramuscular vaccines that don't stop transmission, don't stop long COVID, and have any expectation. I just wouldn't do that.
So that's sort of the alternative that we're sort of trying to develop, is for people who are, who are like, some people are extremely afraid of the needles and they just physically can't take the vaccine.
Yeah.
Others are, may have side effects and reactions that they're just, not willing to tolerate. What we're going for is something very safe and easy to administer. And even if it doesn't create a 2-year-long immunity, if people are willing to just spray their nose, every few months, that could be a solution, right? So we're trying to think of all different ways of transmission blocking vaccine strategies.
I mean, what are the possible risks of an inhaled vaccine?
Oh, yeah, that's obviously the safety is key in any vaccine development. So we would have to test that, in clinical trials and make sure that we don't provide anything that's harmful. But the approach that we're taking, I think, is pretty safe, because all we're doing is we're just giving in saline solution recombinant spike protein. So there's no adjuvant, there's no formulation, there's nothing. It's just, solution that contains the protein. So, and that works really well. And we're hoping that that will be also very safe in humans. We'll have to see.
So is the entry point, this has also been another question mark, is the entry point of the virus, is it in the nose, or is it the throat, or is it the lungs?
Yeah, I think because it's an airborne pathogen, you can inhale it deep into the lung. So it's not just nasal cavity itself. It could also be replicating in oral cavity as well. There's a lot of viruses that we can measure in the saliva. So the sort of upper, lower, and maybe oral cavity. And so whatever vaccine strategies have to be able to induce immunity in these different sites. And recent study in the non-human primates have shown that inhaled vaccines can kind of cover the whole respiratory tract at least. So that may be another strategy to go forward.
So so that I understand, it could be, is it always sort of brewing in all three places, or does it start up in the sinus and the nasal cavity and then travel down? Because there's a lot of talk about nasal sprays too. So just in terms of what we have now, which isn't too much, I'm trying to understand, is that the entry point that is the usual start?
Yeah, it's thought to be nasal cavity is one of the major starting point, and it can spread from there to other tissues. But, we don't really know exactly in people where people get the first site of infection. Like I said, because it's airborne, if you have very small particles that contain virus, that can go directly into the lung. But maybe, much more starts within the nose.
Do you just in your own life use nasal sprays?
Yeah, I think a lot of people get sort of the over-the-counter, nasal sprays, and as long as things are not harmful, I think it's fine to use. I don't know how effective these sprays are.
Yeah,
there are some reports of antiviral activity. So, yeah, I mean, why not? The other thing I do personally is I really take care of the humidity, because our research has found that humidity level between 40 to 60% relative humidity is optimal for the immune health of the respiratory tract. And so we can follow like particle movement in the trachea of animals that's been exposed to 10% humidity versus 50% humidity. And the movement of the particle is pretty much random and stopped at 10%, which means that if you inhale virus at the very low humidity, dry air, that virus is very difficult to be removed through the mucociliary clearance mechanisms. So
that is so interesting.
That's fascinating. So especially in the winter, when we import the very dry air from the outside and heat it up, you get like dangerously low levels of humidity. And so I try to humidify, especially the bedrooms are important. Yeah.
I do that too. Yeah.
Oh, good for you.
I had a great ear, nose, and throat doctor when I was in college and I was studying voice. And he used to tell us to keep a humidifier on in the winter because it was better for our voices and it was better to prevent flu and colds. But I didn't really ever think about it that much in terms of SARS-CoV-2, actually. I'm glad to hear you talking about this.
Yeah. Well, it's against any viruses, anything that you inhale. This clearance mechanism that we have in the lung, in the trachea, for example, it doesn't operate well when you have extremely dry air. And you also can probably feel it, right? When you're singing and when you're inhaling dry air, it's very difficult. So
it is. And if you ever went to Vegas or you saw some of those big Vegas shows on TV with like singer Celine Dion and Cher and whoever, they have like rebuilt these big arenas for them with tons and tons of humidity because it's so dry in Las Vegas. So yeah, it's a really important part of your voice. I was also told that this is the same ENT who's like the voice guy in New York, to line my nose when I fly with Vaseline or Neosporin. I've been doing this for 20 years. And I used to get a cold every single time I flew from New York to LA or New York to Nashville or whatever. I spent most of my time doing, and it really prevented me from getting.
Exactly. I actually also on international flight carry a mask that is lined with moist sponges.
Just like water? Is it just?
Yeah, you can buy these in Japan. They sell these moisture masks, and they're amazing. You basically put these moist sponges in between the masks, and it keeps you moist over this like terrible, 14-hour flights or whatever. And it makes a huge difference. Without that, I can't stand this. I can't stand this dryness. So that's something else you can try.
Okay, thank you. That is very, very cool and interesting. And I also just wondered while you were saying that if just the act of wearing any mask that's sealed so, pretty well just
Yeah.
creates some humidity because you're breathing. Is that a
Yeah,
valid
absolutely.
thought?
Exactly. The other thing, another benefit of the mask is actually warming the nose. And our research in 2015 showed that the temperature of the nose really affects the innate immune defense against viruses. So, at colder temperature, even like bringing down a few degrees, the innate immune system doesn't operate very well. So since that study, I've been, wearing masks just to keep my nose warm during the
It
winter.
works.
It
I tell
works.
you something else. The other thing is that you always see singers wearing scarves,
Mhm.
right? And
Yes.
like we get made fun of for looking pretentious and like, wearing, but it's really to keep to keep the throat warm. And I'm telling you, I think it works. I don't know that there's any science behind it, but just for me, if I feel something coming on, I immediately put a scarf on. I even will sleep in a scarf. I feel like it helps me prevent.
I think you're totally right. You're warming the throat in order for the immune system to work at the optimal level.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. And now singers watching, we can continue with our scarves with a very good endorsement. Um, so I wanted to go back to diagnostic tools because there's always a question mark. Do I have long COVID? Do I have ME/CFS? Do I have long Lyme? Are we at the point where we have tests where you can go to the doctor and find out?
Yeah, that's one of the huge goals that we have in the community is to develop diagnostic biomarkers.
Mhm.
And, as I mentioned, because these diseases are consist of multiple different endotypes, we may need biomarkers to distinguish each of these things. But it's not impossible. We are already seeing these features that are quite distinct in people with long COVID versus those who recovered. So, for example, a diagnostic biomarker for persistent virus version of the long COVID could be circulating viral RNA, something like that, or spike, or whatever it might be. So, we can imagine developing biomarkers that can distinguish these people and hopefully provide the right path for therapeutics. Because for those with persistent virus, you might want to give them antivirals or monoclonal antibodies.
Yeah.
Whereas people with autoimmunity, that's not going to help. They're going to need immunomodulatory agents. So I think, we will get there. I don't know how long it's going to take, but we're all trying very hard to get there.
I mean, my biggest concern at this point is long COVID. Not that the acute disease is not horrible for a certain subset. I think it certainly is. I don't want to undermine that. But in terms of prevention, now we know obviously don't get infected. That's the best prevention. But second to that is early treatment helping. I mean, I've seen some stuff about Paxlovid losing some efficacy. I've seen some nice reports about metformin. I'm here. I just spoke with Amy Prohl. She said, I have permission to discuss the Truvada and Maraviroc stuff with you if we could talk about those potential upcoming trials and what's the deal with trying to prevent with what we have now.
Yeah. So you're talking about prevention during the acute phase.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. And so Paxlovid, so with Dr. Al-Ali's studies, Paxlovid was shown to be reducing the risk for developing long COVID. There was a recent study by UCSF that found no association with protection. So I still think, there is still room to kind of understand better. But just the fact that, the more you can prevent the virus from replicating and spreading to other organs, the better off you are, I think, for acute and long COVID. So, if you're eligible to take Paxlovid and you have no other complications, I would just take it. I took it when I got COVID. So, and then metformin, yeah, again, we need to understand much more about whether metformin during the acute phase benefits people of all different demographics and BMI status and so on. So, there's still a lot to learn. But, that's why we need trials. We need more and more trials to understand better what it is that helps people and how we can sort of deploy that as soon as possible.
Anecdotally hearing from so many patients and knowing so many clinicians, what I'm personally seeing and have always seen since the beginning is that early treatment confers better outcomes. It just sort of stands to reason. And this has been such a difficult concept because there's so little drug repurposing.
Yeah.
It's really disappointing. What are your hopes for monoclonals?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Dr. Michael Peluso has a clinical trial with a monoclonal antibody right now. Obviously, everything is blinded. It's not clear before the end of the trial, but monoclonal antibodies, as long as it's still effective against the variant that you got infected with, should have a good outcome and potentially Paxlovid. We're involved in a trial with Paxlovid. Again, we're blinded, so we don't know who's benefiting or what, but we will find out, soon what the impact is. So, yeah, I mean, I think, all these things should be tried and see like what people respond beneficially to these. And the key thing is to get the biomarker of people who respond to a particular intervention. If we have that, then we can sort of, inform future treatment of those who have those biomarkers.
Doesn't it make sense to you that a longer course of antiviral treatment up front during the acute phase would be more beneficial?
Yes.
I mean, 5 days just seems to me extremely unaggressive.
Yeah, I agree with you. But that was the sort of, duration that was tried. And, I think, of course, in hindsight, this could have been a much longer treatment. Our trial is using 15-day course and hoping to capture, whatever replicating virus there is in the body. But yeah, during the acute phase, I agree with you that it might have been better with a 10-day course.
I'm seeing people having much better long-term outcomes with 10, including Tony Fauci. I mean, people in the know take 10.
Yeah,
public 5. I'm very upset about the landscape of early treatment being so underutilized, and I want people to get access to these things and save themselves the next several years trying to get well from things that have no answers right now. What do you think about Truvada, and what do you think about Maravra?
With Amy Prohl and David Petrino, we are planning a clinical trial for Truvada and Maravirac, which are both HIV drugs, but we suspect that they may have beneficial impact on people with long COVID for several reasons. One is that Truvada, for example, it's a reverse transcriptase inhibitor, which has other, like cross-viral activities, and in particular, potentially EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, that's we see in a subset of people with long COVID with signs of reactivation. And so perhaps Truvada can target those people who have EBV reactivation and kind of, quiet down that reactivated virus. And also, we've been kind of following a hypothesis, which is kind of very unconventional, but line of thinking that so we all carry in our genome endogenous retroviruses. These viruses are no longer active. They're defective viral genome that's spread throughout the body, throughout the genome, and it occupies a very large real estate in the genome. So protein coding sequences that we biologists study is less than 2% of our genome, whereas endogenous retroviruses occupy about 8% of the genome. And so we are very interested in the link between these activate or expression of endogenous retroviral particles and proteins to different diseases. And for example, before the pandemic, we have been studying link between endogenous retrovirus and antibody against the envelope of these viruses that's seen in lupus patients. Yeah. And so we think that, if autoimmunity is a part of the equation of long COVID, if we can, suppress this endogenous retroviral activity inside with Truvada, we may benefit the patients that way as well. So we're looking at a couple of different reasons and angles of which Truvada might be helpful to people with long COVID. And Maraviroc, it's a chemokine receptor antagonist. So it's again used for HIV because HIV uses, some HIV strains uses chemokine for entry. But also because it blocks the activity of that chemokine receptor, we feel that the immune cell activation and recruitment into various tissues might be, again, dampened by the Maraviroc. And if that happens, it might also be beneficial for people with long COVID. So it's these are the hypotheses on which we are starting this trial, and we're going to be looking at immune signatures before, during, and after the treatment, and of course symptoms and other measurements that David and Amy are proposing to do. It should be informative, whatever we find.
I know that we have a hard stop in a minute, and I don't want to go over the time, but before we go, first, just want to thank you and see if you have any parting words of advice for long COVID patients, hope for the future, anything you want to say to their doctors that might help them to see these patients in a more holistic way.
Yeah, well, thank you for this interview. I really appreciate it. I think that unfortunately, long COVID, long Lyme, and ME/CFS are still being dismissed by some doctors as being not real. Yeah. And we're really trying to correct that view by providing solid scientific evidence for disease mechanisms and even just disease biomarkers. And also for the patients, I can't imagine what they have to deal with on a daily basis to just having to deal with so many different conditions that are debilitating. But at the same time, I feel optimistic. I feel hopeful because of sort of daily and weekly reports showing multiple key fundamental features associated with long COVID. That's really leading us to a much more clearer picture of what may be going on. And even though it's heterogeneous and complex, we are untangling at the surface of this disease what's going on. And of course, we have to peel the layer to the very core, but we are peeling the layers right now. So I feel optimistic that we can move forward in a very meaningful way in the near future. Again, as scientists, we can never promise anything, but just know that we're working really hard towards that goal.
Thank you so much, Akiko. This has been my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Ticktective, a program of the Bay Area Lyme Foundation. For more information or to get involved, please visit us at bayarealyme.org.